So you've got a list in the paper here of the highest council tax bills in the current financial year, and the lowest council tax bills. So where can people go, Sam? Well, yeah, you're going to say Express.
Pick up a copy of the Express
to find out if that's one of their councils.
Yeah,
you're kind of ahead of the game on this, aren't you?
Yeah. So I mean, as I say, we've used this county council network research. They've done, I have to say, they've done the hard work. They've gone through these documents, but actually, you'll find that the lowest council tax bills, 9 of them are in London, and that's because London councils get an awful lot more in terms of subsidies from the government.
Right.
So you've got a lower tax bill in London, you've got much higher costs elsewhere, but actually your council tax bills are lower. Now, I've had an awful lot of reaction on social media, huge amounts to this story, and people are just saying, look, my bins aren't being collected as often as they used to be. There's potholes all over the roads that haven't been filled. Our services are being reduced and our bills are going up, and people are pretty furious, I have to say. I'm
not surprised. Are you, Andrew?
Well, I think that is the issue, isn't it? You've got to work out, if you need extra money, where's it going to come from? And a great article, if only I could meet the journalist who wrote it.
I know, aren't we?
It's fantastic. But they've got it, and you've done a lot of list of shame. Where you can find out is go to your local council website, and they will tell you, you're in Lambeth, aren't you, I think?
Yes, I am, yeah.
And yours is only 1.99%, I can tell you, if you didn't know. Mine, however, is 4.99%, because I'm in Westminster, so that's shot up accordingly. Although there is this sort of name and shame list where actually sort of the people at the top, Rutland is going up by 2,300 and threepence, a bizarre figure, but that's what it's going. But Nottingham, Dorset Council.
Just in case
that's the current year's bill.
In case you're in Rutland and you just panic and council tax is going up by £2,000, we just want to clarify.
Panic on the streets of Rutland. I never want to do that. It's got to be good. But they do say, but the reason in the county areas, historically they've received lower government money, and that's why they need to try and find the money somewhere. What you need to do is basically have a spreadsheet. You need to turn around and say, this is how much all the services cost, and this is where the money is coming from to pay for it.
And people need to start hassling their local MPs.
Yeah.
That's what I'm realising. Contact them. They've been, you know, people haven't been enraged by this sort of local stories for almost for decades, as long as I can remember. Yeah. And maybe it's just my age, right? But it just feels like right now we're getting a terrible service, and we're paying more and more for it. Have they explained to Sam at all why they feel they need it?
Yeah, they say that it's the kind of worst time to be setting a local council budget in a decade, that actually the inflationary impact on their own bills has had a huge effect on things like leisure centres. Obviously, heating swimming pools has become really expensive. School transport has become really expensive because of increasing fuel prices, and also the cost of filling potholes, the cost of materials and contractors has gone up. So they're saying that actually we're feeling the squeeze too. But I would just point out there's 3 council areas where if you're a resident in Croydon, Slough or Thurrock, you're going to face a rise of 10% in Slough and Thurrock and 15% in Croydon. And that's because those councils have been so badly run, they've basically gone bust, and taxpayers are now going to have to kind of foot the bill for that ineptitude.
If you're listening and watching at home, let me know what you think about this, won't you? gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address, because I'd love to know whether you feel like you're getting value for money from your taxpayers' money in these local areas. Do we know whether there's a distinction between whether they are predominantly Labour areas or Conservative councils?
I think it's widely spread because it's essentially 3/4 of councils, so in a way it really doesn't kind of matter. It's more to do with, are you London or non-London?
Right.
Are you rural?
I was just wondering whether it was some of the Labour councils playing politics a bit with an election on the horizon and saying, well, look, if you've got a Conservative government, you're going to have to pay more. They've not given, you know. It's important to question everything. You should absolutely look at that. And in the follow-up article, we can summarise both. We'll put both. Talking about questioning everything. Yes. Some people are quite disappointed that they're not UFOs. Let me tell you. Some people were quite looking forward to the fact that we might have a distraction with being invaded by UFOs, but we're not actually, are we, Andrew Eborn? Eborn. These are Eborn, isn't it? Eborn? An unfortunate vowel movement at this time of the morning. Andrew Eborn, that's going to go. Well, some people say we are being invaded. The star who never failed to let us down, they say it is that. I find it extraordinary, the story, because it sounds so low-tech for spying. What, you put up a balloon and you've got somebody looking down on you. It doesn't make sense to me. And if you shoot it down, don't you then scramble and say, well, here's the kit and this is what proves you? Well, that's what the Americans have now done, isn't it? And have they said they found something? They're taking some sort of hexagonal metallic structure out of the water. I just can't help but feel we might be being played here, Sam. Like, surely China has always spied on America and UK. Yeah. We are probably doing something similar, aren't we?
I wouldn't know, and I wouldn't want to declare if I did.
I mean, surely these things must be always going on.
I'm sure they are, and absolutely. But I think Lord Haig, he's obviously a former Foreign Secretary, he was saying this morning that actually this is embarrassing for both China and for the US. It's embarrassing for China that their low-tech balloon has been spotted. It's embarrassing for the US that they've allowed this to infiltrate their airspace. But what struck me was the actual embarrassing thing, I think, for the US is the fact that they did put it out there that they can't rule out extraterrestrial, infiltration of their airspace, which then led to the White House has then had to make a statement saying, we don't think this is alien behaviour. And number 10, our official spokesman for the Prime Minister yesterday was asked by my colleagues, is the Prime Minister concerned about the possibility of extraterrestrial, involvement in these balloons? And he had to say no. Look, he's more concerned about terrestrial matters like cancer, than alien life force sending balloons over the world.
I thought Rishi Sunak's response was quite interesting to this, Andrew, because he was like, I will keep you safe. Yes. We will keep you safe. Yes. There's this rhetoric from the government about keeping us safe. Margaret Thatcher wasn't bothered whether we were safe.
Well, I think she was, but she never sort of touted in that sort of way.
And but this patrician role, stop nannying me. It's my job to keep myself safe. And
it's what we always say, it's about communication, isn't it? Yeah. Is that the message he's being told to peddle people? Because fear, as you know, the father of PR, Edward Bernays, he always said the best way of selling anything is through fear. If people are scared of whether it's little green men coming, or women, or either coming down and invading us, or they're scared of things being on high alert, and a lot of the people talk about these typhoon planes being ready. They're always ready. It's not because of the balloons. It's not new. So the headlines that scream that we're going to be all these sort of problems, they've got issues. But I can tell you that the actual biggest threat is not from weather balloons. It's actually from tech. And the other story in the news at the moment is talking about these drones that the police are using, which come from Chinese firms. And that's a much easier, cleverer way of infiltrating if that were to be the case. Yeah. So they should look at that as well.
Fantastic. Right. Thanks, guys. Coach, thank you. We were talking about the China spy balloons, and John has said China has around 300 satellites, of which 100 are military grade, and could read a tombstone in a graveyard. Why on earth would they need a balloon to spy on the UK? That's what you were saying, Andrew.
That's what was that.
And also, this council tax bill, it's the front page of Sam's paper this morning. Craig says, I'm disgusted that council tax bills are going up considerably yet again. I live in Bridgnorth in South Shropshire. We have poor road conditions, street lights going off at 10 o'clock, bins emptied once a fortnight, schools in disrepair, cuts in transport services and bus routes. I am shocked. You are not alone, Craig. Right, Andrew Eborn, Sam Lister are still with me. So, yesterday, we had this report from Labour about the fact that the Conservatives have spent all this money on these, they're not allowed to call them credit cards, these government procurement cards.
Sounds so catchy, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Well, I think it's meant to deliberately confuse you. And go,
never leave home without one, is what I would say.
Never leave without my procurement card. Well, of course, what then subsequently happened since yesterday is that the Conservative press have hit back. It was always going to happen. And now they are very cross about the fact that Angela Rayner spent money on an iPad and Airpods, and they consider those a luxury item. This story just doesn't fly from any direction, does it?
Well, what I love, I always say history repeats itself because people don't learn the lessons from history and take the speck out of your eye before trying to remove all of those sort of things. So, absolutely, so that's basically the story. She's trying to justify the fact that you can't just have any old headphones. You have to be able to have the best, highest 249 quid's worth of earphone to make it work. And she's justifying that because it needs to sync with the other luxury items that she has around. It is about that sort of hypocrisy. Yeah. You do need to, if you're going to call something out, make sure your own house is in order. And it won't be.
Do you think this was a bit of a non-story when you saw it yesterday, Sam?
Yeah, I thought it was quite clever how they'd done it.
It was clever.
They've got an awful lot of attention from the media, from the newspapers, from broadcasters. That's exactly what they wanted. We're all talking about it. It's on. It was on the front page of The Guardian. It's been inside the papers again today. So it's job done for Labour, really.
Well, it plays into that idea, doesn't it? The Conservatives are not like us. They're just very profligate and they're spending all our money and they don't care. Yeah. In that case, it was a win.
But actually, when you actually drill down into the details, governments spend money, a lot of these foreign trips. Now, when you go on these foreign trips, a Prime Minister cannot be expected to stay in a small B&B because they need to have proper security.
Yeah.
And so they've got to be put in a place that can be properly secured by the security people. They also need the staff there. Now, I get that people don't like government spending money, but you do have to accept that sometimes they do have to buy expensive hotel rooms or, for reasons that are beyond their control. These big summits that they go to, all leaders are told which hotel to stay in by the host nation because they'll do security assessments. So, if Labour take power at the next election, which they clearly are hoping to do, they will be in exactly the same position. So when we look at their data in 2 or 3 years' time, we will find exactly the same data.
Absolutely. Right, let's move on to another piece in your paper today, Sam. This is written by a friend of GB News, Ben Habib. He is, he's not a politician. Well, he was in the Brexit Party, wasn't he? And Ben has written this piece in your paper, which is basically saying, and it's brilliant, and if the Brexit issue is kind of complicated, his piece is really good because it makes it incredibly simple to understand where we're going wrong, Andrew.
Yeah. Yes.
And his frustration is Brexit has not been done. We haven't Brexited. He uses it as a verb as opposed to the noun, doesn't he? We haven't done Brexit. What are the reasons he gives for why?
Well, the basic, and that's the problem, because Boris was elected, fantastic 80-seat majority on the basis, we'll get Brexit done.
Yeah.
And Turner said, well, what does that mean? And what Ben says, you're right, in that brilliant article in a fantastic newspaper, glad we got a journalist from there, it works on that sort of basis. We've left the EU's Commission, its Council, its Parliament and its Court, the EU single market and the customs union, you've got that sort of side, and the principle about taking back control of our laws, our borders, our cash and our fish is what they're sort of basically saying. But there's still sort of issues, because you sort of turn around and say, look, how are things different in that sort of basis? There are so many laws to be unpicked, because it still feels as though it's taking that long sort of process.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of problem. You've got to work out, well, what does Brexit actually mean, apart from being turned into a verb?
That's right, because he says we've left the EU's Commission, its Council, its Parliament, its course, but that does not constitute Brexit. The frustrations, Sam, from people who were Brexiteers is profound. It's just building every day, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think he makes the point that actually we haven't left as one united kingdom. There is still this issue to be resolved with Northern Ireland. Yeah. It's still subject to EU rules. And until that's resolved, then, we haven't completed Brexit. We seem to be edging towards a solution on that, but I don't think it's one that's necessarily going to be acceptable to all Brexiteers, because it sounds like the government is willing to compromise on whether the European courts still have some role to play. Yeah. And I think the government would say that, and obviously this is all kind of nothing has been signed off yet, but I think the government would say that actually it would be a very minimal role, and we would have control over whether things went to the European Court in the first place. But I think you're going to find a whole big Brexit row coming up in the next few weeks.
And it's also about sort of soundbite politics, isn't it? Because when you ask the electorate, do you want to be in or out, the consequences of that need to be explained. You need to turn around and say, well, what does that mean? Yeah. We've got zillions of laws, lawyer, as you know, and you work on that sort of basis. You say, well, we've got to unpick this and that and everything else. What it basically means is we then have to negotiate with the rest of the world to put other things back in place. So I think when you're explaining it, and then Ben starts on that sort of process, you need to say, look, this is what it means in practice.
Yeah.
And Conservative MPs, they are frustrated because they want to be able to show on the doorstep, this is the reason why we did it. Look, these are some tangible results from why we went through all this. And one of the big ones is control of the UK's borders. And obviously, because of the small boats crisis and how many more people are coming over through that route, and also actual legal migration rising, they're saying that actually they cannot present, on the doorstep that we have taken back control of our borders in the way that they would want to.
And do you think there's any faith that if Keir Starmer gets in, that Brexit will be safe in his hands?
Well, that is a suspicion, and actually Conservative MPs say that if you want to make sure that he cannot reverse it, you have to get rid of all the inherited laws we've got, and they're trying to do that by the end of the year. It's going to be very difficult to do that. But they fear that if that doesn't happen and Keir Starmer does come in, then you will start to see this slight unravelling of Brexit.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Going back to the soundbite, though, you'd say, if Boris turned around and said, get Brexit done, the question is, have you?
Yeah.
Right. Women going to university or Sadiq Khan's... Sadiq Khan.
Well, interesting, isn't it? Slammed over nonsense data is what they're saying on this sort of basis. This is about the ULEZ thing, where basically a scheme charging motorists £12.50 a day to drive in London. People are opposing that, so because Bromley's council leader, a certain Colin Smith, he said that the Commission report by City Hall chose to ignore Bromley's much older population. So what Sadiq was saying is that in Bromley it's got the most toxic air of all. There's a higher death rate, higher excess death rate as a result of it, and the usual sort of thing about causation or correlation. Are the statistics right?
No, because he's cooked the books. He's basically chosen a constituency with much higher age, an older population. What's your paper's stand on these low-traffic neighbourhoods, Sam? Because a lot of people do not like them.
No, they don't. And I think it just moves the problem. You know, it just moves the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, does it? So you create these little kind of middle-class protected zones.
That's right.
And with this, I mean, I would say, you know, they kind of go hand in hand, don't they, these low-traffic neighbourhoods and the ULEZ scheme. And I would just say on the ULEZ scheme, it's a London thing, but this will spread. I mean, it's already spreading, and it will just continue. It's spreading to our cities at the moment. It will spread to towns, and it is a tax on working people, because if you drive a van, for example, to do your trade, this is going to hit you. I mean, I already know people who've been hit by it trying to drive into London.
And I live in a ULEZ zone. I had some friends come and stay at the weekend from Wales. £25. By the time they've driven their car to park on my drive, £12.50, drive it off a few days later.
Yeah.
£25 to add to the weekend when they've already paying huge amount of petrol costs. Coming into London, spending a huge amount of money on food and drink. He seems tone deaf to me.
Well, it also, you've got to think about the knock-on effect, because you're right. If it puts people off coming into London, does that then have a knock-on effect for the shops? And that's my point. So a lot of it, you talked about the shopkeepers, the restaurants and so on and so forth, who are really suffering, having had no trade during lockdown or minimal trade. What's going to happen to that? So firstly, get the statistics right. If they're wrong and you're not telling the truth about them, let's address that. Secondly, look at the consequences.
And it's about the trust, isn't it? Because his statistics aren't right. Like, we don't trust you, Sadiq Khan, on this issue in any way, shape or form. We aren't seeing, as residents of London, we aren't walking out of our front door and coughing and choking because the air is so bad. Maybe there are things that we don't know. However, we've got to... It comes back to what I was saying earlier about this idea that the London Mayor is there to keep us safe. Well, do you know what will keep us safe? Tackle knife crime. Give me a security guard on the tube and on the buses. That will make people feel safe. This is just killing our high street, and it's anti-motorist. And I just, you know what I fear, Andrew? I know you're a futurist. You can look into your crystal ball.
Hey.
I feel like the future is just going to be lots of men riding around on bicycles while the women are at home with all the kit and all the paraphernalia that we need to leave the house.
Is that right? You think that's the future?
It's all your fault.
It is my fault. I take the blame. I've got broad shoulders.
We've got to the end of the first hour. Wow, we packed lots in. Now, I will keep you safe, says Rishi Sunak. Are you fed up of being mollycoddled? We'll be back in just a few minutes. OK, we are here on the panel. I'm joined by political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eborn. You know what? Anything can happen on this show.
And it usually does. Why we love it. We love live television. It's got to be good.
Oh, I love flying by the seat of my pants. Let me tell you.
Maybe that's what happened. It was not the balloons, it was you flying by the seat of your pants up in the air. That would be the one.
Most days I feel like I am. Right. OK, this is a bad news story, Andrew Eborn. It's partly because of you.
It's totally my fault. Whenever it's bad news, it's my fault.
This is about our future move towards electric vehicles. And I don't think we have thought this through. If I had £1 for every story when I could start with saying that. Ford have cut 1,300 jobs in Britain as it shifts production towards electric vehicles. Are you completely convinced that electric vehicles are the way forward?
I'll tell you what, and again, it's not as, I don't want to say this, but I did tell you so. And it's something that we've been speaking about for a long time. And it's going to get worse. Because it's not just the one... Firstly, my heart goes out to these are jobs and families and that sort of stuff. And it's, whilst we make light of certain things, the loss of jobs is horrendous. It is something we warned about for a long time. What's going to happen is not just the move to electric cars, it's actually the move to robotics, replacing the workforce and so on and so forth. So what we need to look at, any job, as I've said for years, any job that can be automated will be. And Jack Ma, he predicted exactly that. It's going to be an existential threat to the way that the workforce is constructed. So it's a predictable story. It's tragic because it's 1,300 jobs. There will be more. And I think that's the issue.
It's because the way that the cars are made, as you say, means that there's significantly less work to be done on drivetrains moving out of combustion engines. It's just the robots are making these cars. And, my father and my father's father fixed cars. That was our family business when he sold it a few years ago. 100-year-old car business. Now, we have to move with the times, Sam, but I'm not sure whether we've thought through what these people do instead of making cars.
I mean, these are highly qualified jobs. You know, these are good jobs that we're going to lose here as a country, and that is a great shame. And it is... you know, the government is constantly being asked to think about the jobs of the future. But obviously, long-termism in government is always difficult, as we know. And really, we need to find a way of... Every industry is constantly evolving. You know, the journalism industry is not the same industry that I started in 20 years ago. Staff have been cut because of advances in technology. It makes the job easier to do. You can, you know, you don't need people to take copy down the phone like you used to 20 years ago. You can do it on your phone. So
I loved those days.
They were great days. I
remember phoning through copy and reading out and also somebody typing it on the other end.
And there'd be some fabulous mistakes made down the line, you know. But you know, every industry has to evolve, and that is the sad reality. And jobs are always lost. But the key thing is, how do we find good quality employment for these people in the future? I think the government wants to kind of go down the green technology route, but, you know, there's an awful long way to go on that.
But a lot of the green technology will also be made by robots and will involve AI. I don't know whether you've ever read that speech that Matt Hancock gave in 2017, launching the fourth industrial revolution and introducing Klaus Schwab on stage. And he said, you know, if you don't much like change, I have no good news for you. And he talked about the dirty, the dangerous, the difficult jobs being done by AI and robots. And he's got a point. But then he says, and that leaves people to do the creative and artistic jobs. I'm not sure that bloke who was making cars in Ford wants to spend his day doing a watercolour.
No, but also, I can tell you the watercolours are also being done by AI. We've got chatbots now turning around, and I've spoken about this. They are affecting the creative industries. Journalism, they can start doing all of that sort of stuff. So the creative industries were affected. You've got Moonpig, we talk about Valentine's Day. Love is in the air as well as those balloons. The reality is, it's writing poems. One of the things that Moonpig is now offering is a chatbot which will give you your artificial roses are red, violets or whatever. You work on that sort of principle. So creative industries, every industry is going to be affected. And I'm not being the prophet of doom. I've said this for years. What I will say is that look at alternative ways. Throughout history, we've had technological advancements, industrial revolutions, where people burnt printing presses and so on and so forth. You need to look at what the future's going to hold.
That gave people jobs. I can't see what people are going to do to make a living.
Well, you're going to have more leisure time for people, certainly. And the trouble is people...
going to make us all fat and lazy.
Well, people will live longer, which is why you've got to think...
If they're fat and lazy, they won't.
Well, maybe that's the idea then, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it is that principle. You've got to look at the basic sort of understanding is what's going to happen with technology. Every job that can be automated will be automated. And every job you need to look at and say, could I be replaced by AI or robotics? And the answer is yes. We need to flatten the learning curves so people can prepare for the future.
Well, I'm all very pleased with you getting excited about it, but you've not given me any solutions as to what people are going to do instead.
They will have leisure time. They will have leisure time.
We don't need leisure time. We need purpose. We need to get up in the morning and want to go to work. And human beings need a sense of purpose, Sam.
I really agree.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have our food, we have our shelter, and then we need fulfilment and philosophical... satisfaction at the top of our pyramid. We're losing it.
Yeah. But I think, and also, I would slightly question the fact that we're going to get more leisure time, because actually, for many, many years, that's always been the kind of offer that we kind of take over these jobs through robotics and AI and that kind of thing, and we get more leisure time. Actually, we don't. Our working week has just gone up and up and up.
Right.
So people who are working just end up working longer hours.
Yeah, and you go home and you do your emails on your phone and you never switch off. So your solution of more leisure time is not coming. Your homework, go and find some jobs of the future that are going to be satisfying.
Coding.
These people, coding. I can't think of anything I'd rather do less. That's why Rishi Sunak wants people to do maths till 18, isn't it? So they all become data robots.
There you go.
Right. Talking of education, a record 10,000 fewer young women applied for university for this September. Particularly, it looks like in the nursing and the teaching industry. What else is the kind of the detail of this, Sam? It's a funny story.
Yeah, it's suggesting that there's been a big fall in applications from women because the number of people applying to nursing courses has dropped, and teaching courses where it's traditionally more female-led. And so, you know, this drop, it's saying that actually during the pandemic, there was a spike in nursing applications because people were inspired by what they'd seen, by nurses going out there and doing their bit to help people.
A clap on the street.
Yeah, absolutely. But since then, I think people have seen the reality. Obviously, the nurses are out on strike.
Yeah.
There is a pay dispute. They feel undervalued. It's incredibly hard work. And so that has really tailed off. And it says the number of applicants to nursing courses fell by 18.6%. And for teaching, it was down by 15.6%. It's huge. It's a huge amount.
For the jobs of the future.
Yeah, and you know these are high-demand professions, and so where are these people going to come from in the future? You know, 3-4 years down the line, we're already struggling. There's already a massive number of vacancies. I think from memory, it's about 45,000 vacancies, nursing vacancies. We've already got a huge number of jobs to fill. Yeah, and this is only going to get worse because 3 years' time we're going to have even more shortages if these figures are correct. Yeah,
it's very depressing, this, Andrew.
Well, but you've also got to put it into context, because you must remember that beforehand there was a spike.
Yeah.
So when you're saying it's fallen, what happened is you need to look over a period of time. During the pandemic, the number of applicants choosing to study nursing surged. So you need to look at that sort of side. Well, how much did it surge by, and so on and so forth. Also, this report, and we've got the sort of headlines here, they talk about the number of young women. You've got to look across the workforce. It's not just women, it's so on and so forth. And those figures, so a total of 590 people applied for undergraduate courses in the UK institutions by the January deadline. That was down 2.3% from the same point last year. The question is, why? Is it because they can't afford it anymore? Because of other issues? Do they want to get out and start earning? Or are they no longer interested in these jobs?
And of course, we had the situation last September was it was very difficult to get onto a course because so many people had deferred their entries during lockdown. We got a kind of bit of a backlog, actually, so that students who had even done really well in their A-levels just got rejected. Extraordinary. And so I think a lot of people have gone away and maybe come up with an alternative. University doesn't look as appealing anymore. Obviously, it's very expensive. People are worried about money. And there was also a line in this report about the fact that more universities are taking non-British applicants because they get more money from the international students. That makes a bit of a mockery of Brexit, doesn't it?
Well, no, but that's always been the case. Foreign students have always paid more, and universities, they need to get the money. So it's the same way as we touched on councils beforehand. You need to look at the money flow. And you've got to work out, and behind all of these headlines, and as I say, we try to make sure we stay away from fear-mongering, you're trying to say, why is it? Why universities need money to survive? How are they going to get it?
Well, you'll be delighted to know that there was a rise in people applying to study computing by nearly 10% and law by 2%.
Look, lawyers and computers, see? That's the profession. It's got to be good.
Right, OK. Still to come. It is Valentine's Day, of course. Many of us. Andrew Eborn. The purse strings are tight. We'll find out some innovative ways that people are getting around this. And it involves a gummy ring, apparently. That's after your morning's news. Thank you, Ellie. Now, my panel are back with me. I am delighted to be my political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, broadcaster and lawyer, Andrew Eborn. Right, Sam, this story today about GP shortages, meaning that family doctors are looking after 3,000 patients. That sounds like a lot for a family doctor.
Huge number, and it's gone up quite dramatically. So the number of fully qualified full-time GPs has fallen by 7% in 6 years. So, yeah, you've got about 3,000 on average, but it really varies across the country. If you're in Blackburn with Darwin, you're in trouble. That's the kind of worst place to be in terms of your access to GPs. Other badly affected areas are Portsmouth, Hull and Oldham. But Liverpool, you're all right. There's quite a lot of GPs in Liverpool. So it really is like, this is Lib Dem research. They're saying it's a postcode lottery, and it really does seem to be dependent on where you are. I mean, there's a lot of issues with GPs in that there is a kind of pension tax trap that they call it. So if you a long-serving GP, you're paying into your pension, there becomes a point where it's not actually worth being at work because you're penalised with your pension. And I think that has led to quite a lot of very senior doctors leaving the profession over the last few years. It's a big problem across the NHS, actually, not just in GP, GP professions. It's actually in consultants and across the NHS. And that is something that I know the government is looking at, but it's one of a number of priorities for the budget. It's only if, inflation comes down, if there's a little bit of extra money, they will look at sorting out this problem, and that might help, but that doesn't really help people right now.
You know, Andrew, when I'm looking at these figures, and it is interesting that it's analysis by the Liberal Democrats, this is a bit like Labour doing the digging.
Question everything.
Isn't it? It's like the Labour doing the digging into the expenses, though, this week as well. You can tell that we're going to be running up to an election probably in probably 8 to 12 months. So you have to take some of these figures which are found by rival parties with a little pinch of salt, I always think. But these figures are huge. And I can't quite work out why. It's not that we've necessarily got fewer GPs, but we've got an extra 4 million patients have registered with family doctors since 2016. Yeah. That's a huge number of people.
It is a huge number. And you're right, as we always say, look, dig beneath the story. Why is this story coming out now? Yeah. Who's feeding this narrative? And why is it happening? I mean, you touched earlier on about the pension pot and the cap on the pension pot. And they are looking at that sort of side. It was a news story that broke this week, and actually they touched on it previously, to say, look, we can encourage people back to work by giving them tax breaks if they can invest more in the pension. Because people turn around and say, well, why should I work anymore if I don't want to be the richest person in the graveyard? I want to have an incentive to do that. Also, what it will do, and I know you always love it when I say this, it's going to accelerate artificial intelligence, and it's going to accelerate robotics within the medical field. And I always say, imagine if you could have a doctor's surgery which could be connected to the best medical intelligence in the world, and all doctors could benefit from that. What will happen is you're going to get earlier diagnosis, and earlier diagnosis will mean that people get cured earlier and so on and so forth.
We're going to get misdiagnosis. Let me tell you what happens when I go into my GP. They've got one of those screens where you go in and you put your date of birth in, and then it will tell you the doctor's ready to see you. It's always got an out-of-order sign on the front of it.
It doesn't believe your date of birth.
Nothing works anymore.
It knows you're much younger than that. That's what happens.
Nothing works. This is the problem, this drive towards tech and a future of digital to save the NHS. Nothing works, Andrew.
Well, it's certainly right to a certain point. Some of it breaks down in your direct results of it. It's wrong to say nothing works.
Well, my experience.
Electricians, that's a good job for people, to get a few sparkies. No, the reality is, it is going to work, it's going to get better. It's understanding. That's what we try and do on this show. We turn around and explain what's going to happen. And as a futurist, that's exactly what we're going to try and do, prepare people for the future.
What does that mean? Yeah, but a GP, the whole point, Sam, of a GP is it is the personal, it is the human face of your health journey, right? I don't want a screen to go in and type in what's wrong with you. What are your symptoms? Type it in. Right, we're going to give you a little box of pills on your way out.
Yeah. The way my local GP has dealt with this is to effectively put in so many layers before you can actually ever get to the GP. So if you ring up, you're asked why you're ringing up, then you are referred to a clinician, unspecified, who then rings you, takes you through a questionnaire, then you get to see somebody, but it's not a doctor, and they don't actually tell you when you get there. It's another clinician who then takes you through another questionnaire, and then you might get a call back, or then you might be able to see an actual doctor. But, what they're doing is trying to weed out minor cases, which actually makes a lot of sense.
Like a good idea to you?
I'll tell you what it's doing. It's accelerating the need for the real cases. And everybody recognises that if you can reduce waiting times by two things. One is earlier diagnosis, but secondly, getting rid of that admin side of it.
Yeah.
That has got to be an advantage. And I speak to a lot of doctors. I speak at conferences. I talk about technology and how the power that it can unleash. We help them prepare videos in terms of getting patients ready for their first experience. All of that will help reduce waiting time.
No, I don't agree. You and I will fight about this till we're all living in your robotic world. I don't agree, and I just think there are so many... I think maybe it's as a woman as well. We have quite complicated health needs because often, you know, we birth children. Just to point out, we still do, amazingly.
Do you?
We haven't got robots to do that for us yet. It's only a matter of time. But, you know, we are this multifaceted, sophisticated system of pipes and tubes and, you know, various things that we don't want to have those conversations with a robot.
But it's not just conversations, but it's other things as well. It's earlier diagnosis, so it's not taking completely out the human element. It's speeding up the boring admin stuff, the stuff which takes a lot of time, and it takes it away from the expertise. So if like you're working on that sort of basis, you'll still have your personal touch.
I just don't care. I want more human beings, more doctors, more nurses. Let's put the power back in the hands of doctors. They've had enough of that taken away the last few years. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about whether you missed it. If you missed the show, why? You can see it back on the app, on the GB News app. And we were talking to William Sitwell, restaurateur, about tipping and the complications in this country particularly. We're quite awkward about it, aren't we? And you've all been getting in touch on this. It really did light up the inbox. And David has said, absolutely no problem in asking for the service charge to be removed. I did this only the other day in a chain restaurant, always tip separately in cash, and this ensures that the tip goes to the staff who served you. I usually check the size of the bill before deciding how much cash to give. Sam, do you find it awkward when the service charge bit of the bill comes around?
I prefer it to be included, and then I can just do it all on my card.
Are you a politician? Not one of those procurement cards, is it?
I couldn't possibly comment. But I do know, it's funny because I spend, if I'm not in London, I'm in Yorkshire, and I do notice there is a difference. In London, it's automatically added. In Yorkshire, it very rarely is. Yes. And I think there is more resistance in Yorkshire to just having it automatically added because people want to... Whereas in London, people just want to pay it on the card, they don't carry cash, and they just want it to be really quick. So I've noticed a difference. Yeah. I'm wildly stereotyping, but that's my experience between the two.
We Northerners don't like having the mickey taken out.
Exactly.
We'll call it out, whereas in the South, people just go, it's fine, I don't want any fuss, just
People, but that's it's very British, isn't it? Not to create a fuss. But in a lot of restaurants, they say at the bottom, service not included, and boy, do they mean it sometimes. Service has collapsed in some of these establishments. I have the joy of eating in some of the finest establishments. A lot of those have gone downhill tremendously over the last things. I think you have to be, if you're a service industry, you need to deliver on that service.
Yeah, and that requires good managers who are prepared to train staff and hold them to account if they're doing a rubbish job.
Absolutely.
Now, let's just talk a little bit about Valentine's Day before we go. I'm sure you've been excited. Do you have any plans for Valentine's Day?
Every day is Valentine's Day for me. They talk about the GOAT, it's the greatest of all time. I will gloat, I'll be the greatest lover of all time. You could work on that. No, but I love romance. Romance is not there.
I'm quite scared, Sam. I'm going to come to you quite quickly. You're married. Do you have a couple of kids?
Well, we're not actually married.
Oh, how very old-fashioned of me.
We are. We've been together 14 years, and I am allergic to Valentine's Day, and I put a ban on it in my late 20s. I just will not celebrate it. I'm just not interested. It's just so phony, isn't it? Yes. Like, just be nice to each other the rest of the year. You don't have to, like, just the thought of going out with loads of other couples, everyone's sat there looking, oh, why are we having to pay this massive bill? I'm very unromantic, and it's just not my thing.
Is your partner the same as you?
He's more romantic than me, but, you know, he doesn't believe in Valentine's Day either, so we're quite happy on that score.
Good. Well, there we go, a little bit of realism to end the show on. A bit depressing, though, wasn't it?
Oh, I think love is in the air. We're going to do that. It's going to be glorious. Wellington that beef, bake that Alaska, and arrange yourself a little ducky. That's what they say.
Well, love is in the air. Thank you so much for watching today. We've come to the end of the show. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you tomorrow at 10.